just start to introduce the panel chairs. The panel chair for the market panel is Isabel Dressel-Horch. Isabel is the chairwoman and one of the founding members of the Shipping Professional Network in Hamburg. She has more than 13 years of experience within the shipping industry, and today she's holding the position of Energy and Fuel Manager of Carnival Maritime. At the second panel, which is the HR panel, that will be hosted by Manas Vaid. Manas is the chairman of the Shipping Professional Network in Mumbai. He started his career within the industry in 2004 and has a high experience within the industry from both offshore and offshore. Manas is a previous board member of the Ship Professional Network London, but then moved to Mumbai and started Ship Professional Network in Mumbai. He is today part of Mash Group and working with the Treasury and Risk Division. So then I will just hand over to Isabel for the market panel. Isabel.
A warm welcome from Hamburg, and thank you very much, Thomas, for having us, or for SPNH. As Thomas pointed out correctly, I am a manager energy and fuel with Carnival Maritime. And to be honest, beginning of the year, from an energy perspective, I thought our biggest challenge is going to be to handle the sulfur cap that came in place beginning of the year, but turned out I was not exactly right with that. So we're more than pleased to welcome our three speakers who are going to give us a more detailed insight of how the different markets were hit by or influenced by COVID-19. So I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Nikolai Hanstein. He's head of analytics for Lorentzen and Stemco, and is going to give us a more detailed view into the wet and dry markets. Lorentzen and Stemco is a storied brokerage house for all major shipping segments. It's headquartered in Oslo and has different offices around the world. In his position, Nikolai closely monitors all the different developments in the markets. He previously worked as a senior shipping analyst with Pareto Securities. So welcome, Nikolai. Our next speaker then is going to be Arthur Richer. He's a senior freight analyst with Fortexa. Fortexa is an energy intelligence provider for waterborne crude oil. Previously, he worked as a pricing specialist covering the tanker market with Platts in London. And since 2019, he's part of the board of our mother organization, SPNL. And he's going to give us a more detailed view into the tanker markets, how this is being affected by COVID-19. So also welcome to you, Arthur. And our last speaker is going to be Mark Cameron. He's Executive Vice President and COO of Ardmore. In his previous roles, he used to work with Maersk and TK, spent 11 years at sea, rising to the rank of Chief Engineer. He's as well chairman of the International Parcel Tanker Association 65, board of the West of England P&I Club, and also advisory board member to the NGO Carbon War Room. So, and he's going to give us a little bit more insight of how did actually the owners handle that situation and perceive the situation. So also a warm welcome to you. Before we're going to get started, you're going to see a poll question popping up now on the screen. And that is going to give us a little bit more insight of what are you guys actually interested in. So the question is, which shipping markets are you most involved with? Is it wet, is it dry, or both? Please click, and we're going to see the results shortly. So we have some more seconds. And well, actually, it looks like that most of you, 68% are interested in both, 16% in wet and 16% in dry. That is quite even. Very good. Just to let you know, after the three presentations, we're going to have a short Q&A session. So if you have any questions, down below there is a field. Write in your questions, and we're going to try to answer as many as possible, but obviously we are short in time. And then I would say, Nikolai, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Good morning, everybody. It's a great privilege to be part of this conference. I'm joined today by Oliver Liebeck. He's a student at the University of Plymouth. He's studying maritime business and maritime law there for the bachelor's degree. I've been to University of Plymouth myself a few years ago and holding a presentation there on the shipping market. And it was great to be there and meeting all the students, professors, very kind of high-paced, very motivated student environment. So it's great to have this opportunity today. We've been preparing a presentation for today. I'll try and share it with you now. Can you see it? Yeah, as Isabel said, we're Lawrence and Stomoko. We have our headquarters here in Oslo, but we have also offices in Europe, in Copenhagen, in Athens. We're in New York, in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. We're involved in chartering, S&P, newbuilding projects, in bulk carriers, in tankers, in gas carriers, and also in offshore service units. And we've been doing a lot of transactions over the years in all these sectors. So that's our background. We've been asked to talk briefly on the impact of COVID-19 on the shipping market, and obviously it's had a very detrimental effect globally since it started some 13 months ago now. In Wuhan in China, it spread very quickly to the rest of China, then to other Asia, then it moved to Europe, and then to the States. It's become a global pandemic, obviously, but it's good to see that the research centers and the pharmaceutical companies have been acting so fast over these few months to come up with new vaccines that are already being inoculated to some patients. And I think within the first half of next year, we'll see much more of the general population being given the opportunity to have the vaccine against the virus. On the economy, growth has been hurt very greatly in the States. The economy has contracted. It's thought as if we'd see a contraction to the extent of 4% this year, but the Federal Reserve Bank yesterday moderated that contraction. So it's not going to be as greatly as 4%, but it's going to be a very hard hit on the US economy. And in Europe, even more so, with a very significant contraction. And the only sole country to really manage growth this year will be China. It's going to have a moderate growth, but it's going to be a growth nevertheless. And I think with the 5-year plan that was unveiled by the party a few weeks ago, they're aiming for growth at about 5% over the next 5 years. So from 2021 till 2025, they're at least trying for a growth at that rate. And if they succeed, it means China will be the world's biggest economy, ahead of the US and ahead of the EU, which are about the same size. And with that, of course, the economics are gravitating towards Asia, and that's also very much true for the shipping markets. We've seen in the container ship market so far this year that there was a very significant slump till May, June, but then the economy has recovered since then, And that's also impacted a lot on the container ship movements. On the left-hand side there, you can see in the green bar the extent to which the Shanghai to Los Angeles volumes have improved. And that's continued into the fourth quarter of this year. So it's been that trade in particular, along with the Asian into Europe trades, that have improved. And the reason for that has to do with the US economic developments. And more specifically, in June, every American got $1,200 directly. And of course, there's not much of an opportunity to act being given that kind of a cash receipt, with employers restricting access to office and other lockdown attempts. You can pay down your debt or your bills, or you can go online and do shopping from home. And that's indeed what's happened. A lot of people have bought goods from home, and it's being shipped at sea. So that's driven in very large amounts the container ship market into the third and the fourth quarter of this year. Very high pre-Christmas shopping ahead of Thanksgiving and of Christmas coming up. But yesterday we saw that the U.S. Congress is now trying to enact a $600 to $700 bill per person, which should further boost up the container ship market, in our opinion, if that is being implemented. So if that is the case, I think we'll see rates spiraling from now on, from already very, very high levels. The market is tight. There's not much excess capacity around. And it means that a small push-up in demand is going to have a big impact on freight rates. So we're quite encouraged, optimistic on the container ship market into the first, but also the second quarter of next year. On the oil market, it's been a very similar type of development. You can see in the yellow line there that the demand for oil collapsed in the second quarter of the year, but it's recovered to a greater extent into the third and the fourth quarter of the year, though not to a pre-pandemic level. So there's some way to go before we're back to where we were before November 19, but we're getting there. But at the same time, you can see that the producers, meaning Saudi Arabia and Russia, enter into a price war in February and March. It drove the oil prices to absolute collapse. But that also meant that the refiners and the traders acted on those price collapses and started building inventories of oil onshore, but also at sea. So that really drove up the tanker markets in May, June, July, and partly into August. So the tanker market has been counter-cyclical to the oil market all throughout the year. When refiners started drawing down on inventories, of course that had a negative impact on the tanker market. And so we're at a stage now where I think we'll see some more drawdowns in stocks into the first quarter of the year. It's going to weigh down on the tanker market, but slowly. But we will see that the improving refining margins are going to push up the interest by refiners to store up more crude oil again. Here's the imports of crude oil by China over the last year or so. You can see exactly that, a huge spiral in imports, but then that kind of negative development since then, and then slowly we've seen a recovery in imports again into November, which I think will continue into December and January at the least, and starting a more fundamental recovery phase again. And then finally on the tanker market, you can see that the throughput there in the blue bar has been very, very stable. It's increased a bit, so that we've seen the November figures for the refinery runs exceeding 14 million barrels a day. That's all-time high records in refinery production. Imports are recovering a bit. It means that the Chinese oil balance is starting to become pretty stable at this time. And refining margins, I think, will be the key factor to look at when figuring out the imports going forward. Yeah, the order book for tankers is very moderate compared with the existing fleet. I haven't seen those figures in many years. It means that we're entering some years now with a no growth in the tanker fleet. It means that all growth on the demand side is going to come directly to the owners. So I think it's a good time for investments in tankers at the moment. And that is also the case for bulk carriers. This year, all growth is going to come from China, without exception. The Chinese import growth for iron ore, for steam coal, for coking coal, for grains, and for other minor commodities will be the only factor to speak of in 2020. All other importers are reducing their intakes, including Korea, Japan, India, the EU, and others. But the rate to which Chinese imports have exceeded expectations means that they're overcompensating for the lack of imports elsewhere. So in all, we're going to see growth in the market this year because of the Chinese imports. And I think looking into next year, we'll see a more broad-based type of recovery going on, with not only the Chinese presence being there, but joined by the other traditional importers as well. So other Asia will come back, and Europe will come back with more import requirements. And that, I think, is going to hold out some opportunities for this market, to the extent that I think we'll see a very kind of robust recovery going on from 2021 till say 2023 for the next 3 years onwards. It's going to depend a lot still on the Chinese side. Steel production in China will be ramped up continuously. It's going to exceed 1 billion tons this year. We'll see imports of iron ore into China this year at over 1.1 billion tons, 700 of which will come from Australia, some 200 from Brazil. But that's the uncertainty also on the producer side, whether Vale, in Brazil's case, can deliver the volumes that the Chinese are requiring. If not, commodity prices are going to spiral, and it could have a dampening effect on the demand for bulk carriers. But look at this graph here. You can see on the supply side of the market that just into next year, we're going to see just as many scrappings, I believe, as new building deliveries. Fewer deliveries than this year, possibly more scrappings because of higher scrap steel prices, as China will reopen the imports of scrap steel again into electric arc furnaces. And then into 2022, when we're going to see still fewer deliveries, a high pace of scrapping, and a net negative fleet growth. I can't recall, at least in my 30 years in this business, having seen that kind of an outlook before. So it's unprecedented, and I think those two factors combined, a broad-based recovery with other importers joining China, and a net negative fleet growth, will really set the stage for a fundamental upside in this market. But of course, and I believe other speakers will touch on this, there's very, very steep ambitions by the IMO to reduce carbon emissions by 50% in 2020 compared with the 2008 levels. It means each ship will have to cut its carbon footprint by 70%. There's new EEXI regulations coming about from the IMO side. The EU is entering this sphere with ambitions on its own, possibly opening up for more regional type of initiatives. And there's initiatives also by charters, oil companies, to monitor each ship in respect of CO2 emissions. And then you got on the financing side, the banks and financial institutions, and the Poseidon principles, which are very similar to those of the charters. So in all, it means that the pressure is on the owners, and it's very much restricted the S&P activity this year because of the uncertainty for which ships will be acceptable over the next years. And it's pushed the discussions on the new types of energy for new buildings to a very great extent in terms of dual fuel ships running on both marine gas oil and natural gas. But also, since that is not enough to meet the ambitions of 50% reductions, having other alternatives as well, such as ready ships for methanol, for ammonia and hydrogen, and those discussions are not going to stop anytime soon. So all in all, it's creating an environment of uncertainty, but it's also creating an environment of opportunities for those who are set to meet those type of ambitions and regulations. So I think it's a very exciting year that we're entering into. On our side, I should mention, we've set up a new team in wind, and we're very much engaged in terms of a non-fossil fuel type of solution. So if you have any questions or queries on this, let us know, and we'll be happy to come back to you on this. Yeah, with that, I think, Isabel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. And we're going to jump into the next presentation to Arthur.
Thank you, Isabel. Let me share my screen. I might need Nikolai to exit.
Yeah.
Cheers. All right, I hope everyone can see. Thank you again for having me here to the University of Plymouth and the SPN South West. I knew Nikolai was going to do quite a comprehensive presentation, so I'm going to try and not repeat too many of what was said, and really focus on some of the more unusual and interesting tidbits we've seen around the the tanker markets. Now, it was about March this time last year that I was in the LNS offices in Oslo talking to the S&P research analysts. So it's a bit sad that we're not able to travel around, but at least with the technology, we're still able to come together. And it's great to be here with students and fellow attendees, as our goal at the end of the day is to help young professionals with their networking within the industry. And before being young professionals, we're all students. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into my presentation. As Isabel mentioned, it was probably one of the most volatile years ever. It's a year where black swan events became the norm. It was very hard to predict. Everyone had on their mind IMO 2020, maybe the effect of sanctions. And next thing you know, all this was kind of swept aside to make way for this pandemic and its effect. Short introduction to Vortexa. We provide energy and freight companies with real-time data insights. So what does that mean concretely? We aggregate data from satellite AI signals, from broker reports, from port agents, from traders, to kind of bring it together with our machine learning analytics, as well as our domain expertise with our market analysts, to really provide the companies that use us with a sort of analytic dashboard, which is going to help them really see not only which ships are on the water, but what they're carrying, where they're coming from, where they're going. And it helps the industry to make really the most optimal decisions when it comes to knowing the complete and most detailed supply picture of what's on the water, where it's going, and how they can make their trading decisions using our tools. Going back to COVID, well, this is a sort of a summary slide of what really happened. It pits together global oil in transit that we track with freight rates. I've put here freight rates for VLCCs, your larger tanker sizes carrying crude from the Middle East to Asia, as well as MR2 rates carrying gasoline from Europe to the US, to try and put the dirty and clean tanker markets against one another. Now, the global oil in transit, that really represents everything you can think of: your crude oil, your gasoline, your diesel, your jet fuel. What's really interesting is that up until April, May, well, prices crashed at first because of the pandemic, and low prices led to a real tanker boom. Traders, charterers, refiners, they were trying to get their hands on as much as they could, which led to the sort of spike in April 20 that you can see here in terms of volumes on the water. This was coupled with floating storage as well, which we're going to see in the next slide. Now, why did they do that? Well, because the price was cheap, they thought they could make more money selling it in the future when the prices would come back up again. So that meant they didn't necessarily need it to be delivered today. So they really tried to put it as much as they could on these tankers offshore. At the same time, they were trying to fill to the brim their onshore stocks with that cheap product that they could also use in the future. So you put two and two together, you had so much demand for tankers that this is when we saw rates shoot up again to the year highs, combined with the oil in transit. Now that made sense. The only thing is that it didn't really last. At the same time, with the price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia that Nikolai highlighted, well, that oversupplied the market. It just brought a bit too much oil on the market. And the problem is that was coupled with national lockdowns, with no one flying anymore, no one going anywhere, no one doing anything. So, to put it in real simple terms, there was a total demand destruction there. And this is when tankers went bust. And as you can see, they haven't really been able to recover since then. Now, they got a bit of a double whammy as well, because if you remember what I said, at the same time, you had all this floating storage, all these offshore stocks. And the problem is, with people now starting to draw on these stocks, not only did they not need to buy their oil from abroad or from further away places, because they had it already in their stocks in all these storage facilities, both onshore and offshore. But at the same time, every single tanker that came out of floating storage went back into the market to try and compete for the low number of cargoes. So not only are people not buying, but if they're buying, they're taking it out of storage. And these tankers coming out of storage are then coming into an already depressed market. So you put everything together, you've really got a combined storm, which leads to the very low earnings that we're seeing today. Now, this is one of my favorite slides of the year because it really talks about what happened in floating storage. Floating storage was something which wasn't necessarily in the psyche of people outside of the industry. And even within the industry, it wasn't necessarily what people were mostly looking at. But here we're talking about a topic which made it in the Financial Times and Bloomberg into sort of general market publications because of what was happening. Now, this represents the fleet utilization, so how many tankers are being used or being employed for floating storage purposes. So traders charter them, put a cargo on board, and then they hang around and float with these cargoes. If you compare with my previous slide, you can really see that boom here. Everyone wanted to have a cargo and store it offshore. And in May, we really saw this spike across all the different tanker categories. Now, your handy-size, that carries a cargo of about 30,000 tons, and your VLCCs upwards of 260,000, which is about 2 million barrels. But you can see this was really a story across all the tanker classes. Whereas previously, it could have been maybe more a case of your Aframax and LR2 or your VLCCs, because respectively, they're the ones that really give you those economies of scale within your respective markets, either crude or clean products. But as quickly as it came, we then started really seeing that downwards trend, which matches what we were talking about earlier, about these stocks being drawn out of floating storage and then these tankers being released out of it. VLCCs remained elevated for a while, but this could also be the case that the numbers are fudged by the fact there was a lot of congestion in Chinese ports. You had operational difficulties, a lot of tankers were headed there, with, as it's been shown, China being really the biggest buyer in the market. About 25% of crude purchases end up in China, which is really massive, and no one really competes or comes close, maybe bar India. So your VLCCs remained elevated here because they were stuck off the coast of China for a while. So they're included in these floating storage calculations. But as you can see, that's also started to come off in the end. And oversupply is still something that's very prevalent in the market. So floating storage is something people are still going to keep an eye out for. What's interesting now is that market participants have the lessons of 2020 in terms of what happens with floating storage. I'm now going to focus on something a bit niche, which is Chinese energy imports from the US. Now, first of all, we're seeing these amazing news every day about how vaccines are being approved, how vaccines are efficient, but there's still an immense logistical challenge in terms of going back to normal, going back to how the world was in December, Jan, 2019, 2020. So this is especially true for the shipping markets. We're not going to go back to those levels anytime soon. So the recovery is going to be very uneven around the world. Whether lockdowns are going to be lifted in Europe, the US, what's going to happen on other continents is really anyone's guess. But one thing that's going to remain steady, let's say, and this was shown in the previous presentation, is the Chinese appetite for energy. And they're really going to be driving this. Now, the reason I wanted to focus on the US is because the US is still going to remain one of the world's largest exporters of energy. And even though the Chinese commitments to the US trade deal in terms of energy imports haven't really been met to the fullest, we can imagine that as the relationship might improve with the new president-elect, then we can see this buying picking up. And we saw already that the energy imports have been picking up towards the end of the year. And that's going to be really something to continue focusing on. It's really the sort of only bright spot, in my opinion, that can really drive that tanker demand. But otherwise, it's going to be very, very uneven. So what's going to happen for 2021? These are sort of my own thoughts. By no means are they the gospel, but just to summarize, floating storage is going to remain key. It's really going to continue its sort of balancing function within the market. I don't expect all in-transit volumes to go above 2020 levels in 2021, purely because we had a massive spike in 2020, albeit softened by drops as well, but there's still a lot of oversupply in the market, and that still needs to be drawn upon, sort of balance things out. China, we expect it to remain the world's largest importer of crude. Will it be enough for freight rates? I don't think so, because one thing I wanted to bring everyone's attention on is what's happening with refineries. 1.7 million barrels of refinery capacities are planned to be shut between 2020 and 2021, according to the IEA. And these refineries are important because they're the ones that process the crude, and they're the ones that lead to the exports of clean products. And a lot of them have suffered during this pandemic. We've seen a lot of oil majors maybe accelerate their shift to renewables. So their impact is not to be underestimated. And that's going to have a strong impact on tanker markets as well, specifically clean, but it's going to be a sort of double-edged sword, where countries where refineries are shut won't be exporting these products. So tanker demand might suffer in those regions because they won't have these cargoes to export. But at the same time, we've seen, for example, Australia shut down quite a lot of its big refineries in APAC. And that's actually led to a strengthening of tanker demand because they are now dependent on other countries to get their clean imports. So that actually leads to a strengthening of tanker rates in that case. So, these are all themes to look out for. I hope you found it interesting, and happy to take questions later during our Q&A panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. And then I'm going to hand over to our last presenter, Mark. It's you.
Good. Okay, thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me, and you can see my screen. Can you see that? Okay, good. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Mark Cameron. As was mentioned, I'm the COO at Ardmore Shipping. We're based here in Ireland, but we have offices in Houston, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So I'm just going to give a sort of an overview, more perhaps from an operational side, and I'll certainly touch on the market and give any views as to during the Q&A. I think, for us, when we look at 2020, the accommodation block, which was always home to our seafarers, very quickly became very much the prison block, in as much as the way that our sea staff were really left to fend for themselves. It was a particularly difficult year, obviously, for all of those of us ashore. But when we talk about safety, we never is considered as much that the mental safety of our staff on board would be as affected as it was, and continues to be. And throughout my presentation, I think you'll see that there's a significant disappointment for the way that our industry has been treated by way of the world authorities, and certainly in terms of the respect that we believe that should be afforded to our industry as a whole. If you consider about how we've gone about it, as in anything in life, you develop a lot of plans and you try and work around those plans. And of course, once you've started a plan, you can obviously change it. But when you are having to change it repeatedly with regard to people's relief efforts, it becomes incredibly frustrating for people to try to understand why it is just not possible to affect these plans as clearly as what we'd hoped. A lot of frustration built up. And, in terms of the families at home wanting to know when people were being relieved, families at home wanting to get their staff back to work, an incredibly tense time. And if I tell you how many phone calls and engagements we've had, it's an unbelievable amount of effort that's gone into the shoreside attempts to get people relieved. And, you know, at the end of the day, the treatment by the authorities has been completely unacceptable and disrespectful, to be quite honest. And at the end of the day, the fact that the ships have kept going, I think, is a testament truly to the professionalism that seafarers have shown. And, you know, at the end of the day, when people have felt abandoned throughout this, you know, the seafarers themselves are sort of questioning, well, why are they doing this role, and why are they serving a need across the world, a very important need at that. So shipping relies deeply on trust. And by this, you know, at the end of the day, the seafarers, you don't necessarily get to interact with them as much as you would have liked to have done, of course. So you have to rely on the fact that they're doing their jobs as efficiently and as effectively as you would want them to. But of course, when the system has let them down, there is that sense of complete abandonment, as I said before. And it wasn't the owners or the employers, and it wasn't the managers or the crewing departments, and it certainly wasn't even the unions that let them down. But it's been the entire governance structure that shipping operates to. And, you know, this really lies at the IMO's door. And I think that a lot of the strong words and effort that was put in didn't really amount to much. So, you know, what's changing? You know, seafaring is seen as truly a global career choice for people. But people don't really understand the importance. And, you know, very often it's out of sight, out of mind. So, as I said before, when that trust has now been depleted, we've got to work doubly hard to get that back to a standard. The perverse nature of trade, you know, as the presenters before, Nikolai and Arthur, mentioned, you know, Q1, Q2 for many tanker owners presented record earnings, and that's kind of the perverse nature of the world that we found ourselves in. But of course, everybody stepped up to keep the ships going. And as many of you will know, if you don't have valid siren, you don't have your certification in order, ships can't trade. So I think the infrastructure around shipping, the flag states, the class societies, did step up tremendously well to help us get the certificate, maintain the certification, as well as the inspections. But of course, there was a lot of extra work. A SIRE inspection could take up to a week of preparation in terms of uploading certificates and documentation, which placed an enormous additional burden on ship staff. But it's worked, and I think that's an important takeaway. You know, at the end of the day, when it came to working together in an unprecedented way, a lot of technical managers collaborated, and that allowed, you know, those charter flights to become better priced because they were full as opposed to half empty. And of course, there are those who, you know, sought to make as much money out of this as possible. Some of the agency fees that we saw for taking cars for people in the Bahamas, for example, were over $1,000 just to move people 15 miles across an island to an airport. You know, that kind of profiteering is not only distasteful, but it is the price that you just end up having to pay. And of course, there were those who continue to flout the rules, and we've had certainly some pilots refuse point blank to wear PPE, which has been extremely, you know, kind of difficult for the guys on board. We were certainly able to move our dry docks around, and that worked really well for us. We were able to, especially in those high earnings periods in Q1, Q2, we were able to delay dry docks, and with the market being in the appalling condition that it's in now, we've been able to take advantage of that by putting the ships into dry dock now. Of course, trying to get spare parts moved around and trying to get people to dry docks has been incredibly difficult and remains so. So that's something that's still ongoing at the moment. You know, a lot of people who've made a lot of, you know, large financial commitments, and particularly those who've installed scrubbers, have obviously deferred a lot of those installations at the moment to reduce, I suppose, the time in dock, but essentially really also understanding that supply of these units is essentially on hold. But of course, you know, in terms of planning. It's better to ask for forgiveness of a failed plan than explain the absence of a plan altogether, and particularly in relation to dry docks. Last two slides here, I'll just go through them pretty quickly. If I look at some cloudy predictions, you know, I think that in terms of the cruise industry, certainly, and of course we're in tankers, but, you know, massive implications for cruise. And, you know, there's always going to be repercussions. You can't, in shipping, ignore the fortunes or failing of one sector, because certainly in terms of financing and employment for people, and of course on shipyards themselves. The CO2 debate was mentioned earlier, I think, by Nikolai, and of course, there's limited action has really taken place on a regulatory side until more recently the MEPC meeting, and the movement that is now behind the CO2 debate is momentous. And I think ever since the finance people have really, you know, the banks with the Poseidon Principles and now the charters with the Sea Charter, now that they're on board with this, you're seeing much stronger. And I think that you will see a faster pace of change. I put that into a cloudy prediction because I think the legislative side of things has received a lot of criticism about the pace that it's moving at. And I do think that, you know, we're going to battle to attract that young talent, because as a choice, seafaring is going to battle to be an attractive employer. If I look at this on the brighter side, shipping will remain a vital global service. And I think as the two presentations before in relation to the market showed, there's still going to always be a need for shipping. But hopefully the authorities will take a better view of the service that we do. I put the CO2 back in here again because I think it is a brighter prediction, and you know, anything that is encouraging debate in this area is certainly well worthwhile. The final point, of course, you know, as we know, this will pass, and we'll have new opportunities that come out of this. And I think as we embrace the changes that are going to set in, I think those with an agile mind will be in a good space to be able to continue to not only enjoy the industry we're in, but, you know, hopefully make it a little bit more profitable. So with that, a bit of a gallop through, but I'll end my presentation there, and hopefully there might be some questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. So we are a little bit short in time, but let's have a look at a couple of questions. Let's start maybe with the first one. Mark, that one is for you. Has Ardmore managed to successfully carry out crew changes, and what has been the challenges associated with them?
Yeah, we have. I'm pleased to say that by Christmas, we're largely back on top of our crew changes. The challenges have been everything from arranging visas, which have been incredibly difficult with you know, embassies being closed. Scheduling has been very difficult. We've had one reported case of COVID on board, and just arranging to get the ship out of the port, trying to get pilots, trying to get port authority approvals, been incredibly difficult. Now, we strongly believe that was a false positive, but it didn't matter. The ship was branded as being sort of this pariah for the one person that tested positive. So I think we have now battled to get people to go back, to be quite honest. For those who have been relieved, getting their reliefs now, second time around, a lot of people are saying they want to stay at home. They don't necessarily want to go straight back to sea again. And so there is becoming more and more of a scarcity. If that's going to stay in the long term, I hope not, but that's an ongoing difficulty. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in the last months, what I've been hearing a lot is that, especially with the Filipino crews, they have to, depending on the districts where they're from in the Philippines, they have to go into quarantine 2 weeks there, 2 weeks there, 2 weeks there. So it doesn't really make any sense for them to go back home, because naturally they're only home for like 1.5 months and then be back on board for 9 months, 10 months. So yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Our next question would be, what are your thoughts? Oh, that's a general question, whoever would like to answer. What's your thoughts on the markets in regards to Chinese coal production? Will we see much lower demand due to more green energy solutions?
Yeah, I can pick up on that. Yeah, I think eventually we'll see Chinese demand for coal reduced. It's around 5 billion tons per annum. And the imports of coal into China is only a fraction of domestic demand, but it's extremely volatile and really trading on the margins where coal prices are very, very essential. This year, it looked as if China would reduce its imports compared with 19. But at the end of the year, we've seen a big step up in the Chinese imports, particularly from Indonesia, whilst we've seen the Chinese and Australian relations being very, very strained. So effectively, there's been a ban on Australian-produced coal, which has really shaken the whole trading pattern in the Pacific. But I think we'll need to see some changes coming about. There's around 50, if not 70 bulk carriers lying in China now, waiting to be discharged. So that's one thing we're looking for. What will happen to those ships and that cargo over the next few weeks or so? And then secondly, looking into next year, where is all the coal going to come from into China? Is it going to come from Indonesia almost entirely, or will we see relations coming back again between China and Australia, and we'll see a normalization in trades between those two countries? But I think in the long term, the Chinese authorities are very adamant to try and invest in new non-fossil fuel energy types. So instead of relying 60% on coal for energy, that share is going to come down to 50. That's going to be the first milestone, and that's definitely coming over the next 5, if not 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikolai. We have a lot of brilliant questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I would choose the last question now. If investments on scrubbers are currently on hold due to the financial reasons, how long is it going to take for ships to adopt the usage of scrubbers in light of sustainable environment?
I can give a view on that, and I'm sure the others might have a view as well. Look, I think scrubbers are a choice that I think many people entered into in sort of 2018, 2019. I think quite a few new builds I read somewhere have actually delivered with scrubbers. But my view, and I stress this is a personal view and someone might have a different view on it, but I think that the uptake has been relatively low, and therefore the storage and supply in the bunker supply network of 3.5% fuel is very limited. And I think in a world where the infrastructure needed to store it and supply it is heavily in demand, the likelihood is, with a lowering requirement for people taking up scrubbers in future, pressure might come onto that sector, meaning that it will become more and more difficult to obtain it in different parts of the world. We're seeing a price differential at the moment between gas oil and very low sulfur fuel oil that actually results in us buying more gas oil these days than we are in certain locations than we are very low sulfur fuel oil. And to be honest, the problems with VLSFO haven't so far been any worse than what we had before. Coming off an imperfect world in terms of bunker quality, we're not seeing anything worse.
Okay, thank you very much. So in order to wrap this up, I think the future, well, looks quite bright, but we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, which we all have to work on. I want to thank all of you three for contributing, taking your time. Well, I would like to hand over to Manos for the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Isabel. I hope I am audible now. And I would like to warm welcome all and thank you, Thomas and SPNL, for this initiative of bringing all of us from a different continents almost and working together on this interesting topic, which has touched all our lives in one way or another. I think I would like to thank on part of SPNM Mumbai team that it's a privilege to be part of this gathering. Uh, Before we proceed, we have a very interesting speakers who will like to take us through on the topic how the COVID has impacted on the HR perspective. And we have Jason Nangle, and I can give a short introduction on Jason. He's a managing director of Faststream Recruitment Group, leading the business operations in Asia Pacific region. He has accumulated a wealth of experience in maritime executive research and recruitment, including market intelligence and people advisory in the Asia Pacific and Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions. We have our second speaker, who would be David Tuck, and he's a recruitment director from Spinnaker UK, who will share insights on the UK market. David, I can give a short intro for David. He's specialized in shore-based positions and has consulted on various commercial, technical, sales and marketing, and including finance disciplines. He has an international exposure, building a network of world-class maritime people. David has partnered with industry-leading shipping companies and maritime associations. And with that, I would just also like to start that we can take a small poll with a question to see your feedback. That have you changed or applied for new jobs during the last year? Or considering it? Yes, no. I think we will wait for a few more seconds till we have the results up. Okay, so it looks a pretty tight combination between yes and no. Right, that's interesting. But I'm sure with Jason and David would take us through that this uncertain times maybe have brought more opportunities. Yes, no, and what does the future entails for us? I would like then to pass on to Jason.
Thank you very much, Manas. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. So firstly, Merry Christmas to everyone. So I'm here to talk to you all today about people. It's a pretty hot topic at the moment. It's a broad subject and it's impossible to cover everything in 10 minutes. So I'll do the best I can with the time that we've got. So I'm going to give you a short overview of kind of our observations on what we're being told from two camps of people. So one of the camps of people would be candidates. So these are people that we are helping to secure new jobs. The other camp of people would be clients, so companies we're helping to find the best talent for. But firstly, before I go into that too much, I'll just give you a brief introduction if you're not too familiar with me. As Manas mentioned, I'm Jason Nangle. I'm the Managing Director for Faststream's Asia Pacific region. I joined Faststream 10 years ago from our UK office. Faststream are a global maritime recruitment specialist. So we were set up in 1999, and we have offices in the UK and Singapore, and we employ around about 100 people. We make about 800 placements in a normal year. The Singapore office was set up during the global financial crisis, at which time we saw quite a lot of rapid growth during that period. So I've been in Singapore now for about 8 years. And from Singapore, we hire across the whole of the Asia Pacific region. So we look at, we do a lot of work in shore-based work predominantly here for obviously in Singapore where we are, China and Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, India, Australasia, and many of the Southeast Asia countries. Our UK office covers the rest of the globe. So the pillars of the Singapore office are recruiting all types of kind of commercial, technical, and corporate roles, predominantly for ship owners, operators, and managers. And then we do the same process again with marine companies, so the companies that offer products and solutions and services and so on and so forth. I'm still very, very much a hands-on recruiter, and I spend most of my time on leadership, kind of executive search assignments. So the question I've been asking maritime leaders and candidates are, what's changed? What are the impacts on their business and their people? And what do they foresee happening in the coming months? So I'll kind of start off in, I'll start off in April this year. So the virus was at that point was global. It was affecting everybody. Governments had triggered lockdowns or circuit breakers, as we called it in Singapore. Everyone was trying to predict what was in front of them. While everyone was also trying to get their heads around wearing masks and working from home and so on and so forth. Survival was a prime focus for many companies. And at this point, companies were doing a lot of planning. So back then, hiring went on hold. It almost hit a standstill, at least for a couple of months, while everyone was trying to make sense of it all. Then we started to see movement again. And our job vacancies doubled in the second half of the year. So this is triggered by what we refer to now as the 4 R's. So the first R is restructuring. So companies looking at how their businesses were organized. We did a Singapore maritime survey very, very recently, and 63% of people in Singapore that did the survey said they were worried about their job security. Probably no surprises there. So the second R is reshaping. So companies looking at the makeup of their teams, the job functions, and if you have the right people to handle a wider scope. The third R is replacing. So people who have voluntarily left, they'll often need replacing. There's a fair number of expats in Asia as well that are away from their families, and that had taken some toll. It's just too long. It's just too long away from their families, so they had to go back. Again, from the same survey, 65% of people in Singapore plan to change their jobs in the next 12 months. I think that's a staggering amount of people that plan to change their jobs in this time. We had exactly the same survey in Europe as well, and it was about the same. It was marginally higher in Asia than it was here. So there you go. So the fourth R is reinvention. So based on kind of the senior search work that I do, this has had a huge impact on our business. So lots and lots of companies are soul searching. They're reinventing themselves around how to prosper kind of post-COVID. This is triggered kind of an ever-increasing demand for senior executives with gender diversity, change management, technology. They're really hot topics at that level as well at the minute. Businesses needed new skills as well, so process management, strategic planning, sustainability, digitalization, in order for them to be able to survive then thrive. So again, in the same survey, the Singapore survey, this is 60% of people felt their companies don't do enough to attract female talent. I thought 60% was a little bit low myself. But then I looked at the numbers, and considering less than 20% of our participants were female, so it's definitely a candidate short. It's definitely a female candidate short environment within shipping, which is at the forefront of leaders' minds to be able to change going forward. So then fast forward a couple of months. So from June onwards, we started to see good pockets of business return. So maritime's obviously a very niche industry. There's lots of subsectors, and we've seen highs and lows across each of them during this period. Some companies are using this time to hire good people, like ship managers and ship brokers. We saw a lot of hiring in those spaces, while others are going through cost-cutting exercises or cash preservation to stay afloat, like cruise and the offshore sectors. In each of the regions that we work, so APAC, EMEA, and Americas, we've seen a lot of synergies in the types of businesses that we're doing, but there's also a number of differences in employer mindset. So a separate survey, a global survey, which was targeted towards shipping technical professionals and shipping commercial professionals, we asked employers and employees what impact they thought the pandemic had on themselves and their people. So in both Asia and in Europe, 25% of employee participants said they felt it made them personally stronger, more resilient, and more collaborative internally. So we asked the same, we asked exactly the same question to the employers. And they were a little bit more optimistic that 39% of Asia-based employers said it had made their employees stronger and more collaborative, while in Europe, over 50% felt that way. So there's a little bit of a difference in mindset between the employee and the employers in terms of how they think. So some companies view Asia as a growth market. So they've been more aggressive in certainly plugging holes in the West than they have in the East. But this is rapidly changing now with potentially some light at the end of the tunnel with vaccine announcements and so on and so forth. But I'm sure that countries like, as they have before in every crisis that's happened, they'll be first out the gates, as China are, as you're seeing within China now. The biggest challenges I think we've seen here in this region have been mobility and relocating people. It's been a problem everywhere, but I'd say more so in Asia for shore-based positions I'm talking about here, as some of the countries have enforced stricter long-term measures to eradicate cases. Other impacts include hiring processes and decision-making. It's taking longer to hire people now than it did before. We've seen that, and our length of our deals are much longer now. So more candidates, particularly those with families, they're less inclined to change employers or to relocate. So it's harder to find people, which further adds to the timelines. So we need to work harder for our money, essentially. In addition, governments have put new policies in place to promote local workforce here. At least for the short term, it makes it increasingly more difficult for less experienced, hopeful expats to obtain visas and work in Asia. But saying this, attracting and retaining young people in the maritime sector will be paramount. So the upside is that most of maritime has been relatively business as usual in comparison to some of the other industries. And the numbers of vacancies and the opportunities are just increasing. The future of shipping is in the younger generation who have grown up around technology, which is obviously a hot hiring topic at the moment. Senior maritime executives, they're getting younger. I don't mean literally, but it's younger people that are getting into more senior level roles now. It's not all master mariners and chief engineers anymore that are at the top end. The downsides are that the current crisis has impacted people most at the beginning and at the end of their careers. And pay, on the whole, will be static in the short term, which may be less attractive to young people. So the same global survey, 75% of employers are telling us pay will likely stay the same in the next 12 months. So very few companies will be giving pay rises. The stats were pretty much exactly the same for Asia and in Europe. So if you're taking your first steps into a maritime career ashore, my advice is, firstly, job security comes from being employable rather than being employed. The key is to stay relevant. The key to staying relevant is to stay current. You have to keep reinventing yourself. Businesses are doing this all the time, as do you. Need to be curious, both inside and outside of the maritime industry. Increasingly, the maritime sector is borrowing ideas from other sectors. You need to do the same as well. Maritime is entering a new era of data and technology, so keep up with it. The only constant is change, and we're seeing a great deal of that at the moment. So to finish up on a positive note, again, the same global survey that we ran, almost 50% of clients are telling us they plan to make new hires in 2021. This number is growing. With any decline, there'll be a big uptick. Our new job vacancy numbers have held up okay. So we take roughly ballpark about 3,500 jobs per year. This is a really important KPI for a recruitment business, and it's a good sign for the maritime industry as well. There's been a good uptick, and a new year means new budgets for companies, so more hiring. And if it does tell you anything, we're hiring ourselves at the moment globally across our group. And that's due to some demand that we're seeing. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time. Feel free to connect with me if there are any unanswered questions, and you can find me on our website or you can connect with me through LinkedIn. And have a good Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. That was interesting. Then now we move on to our next speaker. That's David Tubb from Spinnaker UK.
Thanks very much, Maz. And hi, everyone. I'm David Tubb, Director of Recruitment at Spinnaker. And I've been recruiting in the industry for the past 10 years internationally for all shore-based sectors, covering commercial, technical, sales, marketing, and finance disciplines. It's really great to have this opportunity to speak about what I've been seeing and what we've been experiencing on a day-to-day basis over the past sort of 9 months, mainly in context of the recruitment in the UK as a whole and the maritime industry itself. Without a doubt, and probably unsurprisingly, recruitment in the UK has been dramatically affected in 2020 by COVID-19. Before looking at exactly, it'd be best to give context by taking a quick step back to 2008 and the last economic crisis, where then figures from the Office of National Statistics of available jobs from January to March 2008 in the UK was 701,000. By the beginning of 2009, post Lehman Brothers collapse, it was at its lowest point, where it was down to 459,000. So 34% less jobs available in 12 months. January to March 2020 averaged 796 available jobs. And for the period of April to June, this was down to 343,000. So a drop of 56% in just 3 months. So a massive difference in a shorter period of time. There has been a steady recovery, and with the most recent stats in October suggesting that available vacancies are now down 34% on the beginning of the year. Businesses we've seen in the service sector, transportation, tourism, and hospitality industries were hit hardest. Looking at the maritime industry in the UK, it directly supports around 220,000 jobs, and the total employment impact of the industry is around 1.1 million jobs. Specific maritime industry figures for job availability and employment through the pandemic are not necessarily easy to come by, but what we can say is that its necessity in keeping the world supplied meant that it was not as affected as much as other industries, yet it's no way escaped a recruitment slowdown. Some organisations witnessed their business decline from thriving to endangered due to the virus, a reduction in revenue, issues with cash flow, and costs rising exponentially. But it's not just been an economic cause that's affected recruitment. HR teams have had much more pressing daily needs to address, such as preparing for new waves or sudden the virus, as well as local and national lockdowns. They've had to identify what resources they need to retain, navigating furlough and changing job retention schemes, forming and responding to sea-level recovery plans. Businesses in the UK also had to move to remote working, what in some cases seemed just overnight. Were prepared well and in advance for this, making a good transition. Others not so, and had to modify, change, learn, and adapt as they went. Technical crew and HR departments were and still are being put under real pressure with the crewing crisis, which for some companies is taking up so much extra resources that even where recruitment is needed, their current employees and crew have to come first. Companies in many situations are just unable to spare the resource to recruit. This has meant that new planned hires have been evaluated and stopped in their tracks. We also saw an initial wave of redundancies, largely from the cruise sector, as well as businesses going through a restructure. There are really talented individuals of all levels and backgrounds coming onto the market. Really seeing all that brought the gravity of the situation home, a really emotionally charged time. It was quite a challenge and difficult for a lot of people. But it's not all been doom and gloom. Hiring the maritime industry has continued, and it still continues. The focus becoming more on necessity than expansion. For technology, AI and communication companies, there has been the opportunity for new and continued growth. We experienced in especially the tanker charterations market being incredibly buoyant earlier in the year, and our commercial team was at times inundated with vacancies and requests for talents in these areas. And this is also with broking as well. Many businesses were and still are continuing to carry on through their recruiting process regardless of what is happening, adapting to virtual interviews. It's not something new, but certainly has been accelerated by the pandemic. As the first lockdown was imminent, I took a new requirement with a company hiring a communications role. They interviewed by Teams the day after lockdown was announced. 2 weeks later, the candidate was offered, and a week later, they were hired and onboarded remotely, having never physically met. Senior level London-based hires also continued on as well. CEO for the Royal Institution of Architects, Maritime Policy Director for the UK Chamber of Shipping, and a Senior Advisor for the International Chamber of Shipping were all recruited virtually. We also recruited a Chief Commercial Officer in the UK, which involved a relocation at the back end of lockdown. So recruitment has not stopped because of the pandemic, it's just evolved. So what else have we experienced? Well, it seems to be that the fact there is so much working from home and little to no travel, it's meant that for some, there has been more time to look at CVs. Decisions in some cases have been made quicker, which is improving the candidate experience. Companies in maritime have been embracing a new or different way of hiring from start to finish, and it's really quite encouraging. Virtual meetings were previously used for interviews only at the first stage across different countries. We are hopeful that these changes can continue, not just during the pandemic, but also be incorporated in many recruitment processes in the future. There's so much time and expense that can be saved, both by companies and potential employees, by considering this as an option beyond first interviews further down the process. That's before we even consider the environmental benefits as well. However, we do understand that attending a virtual interview is a very different experience to a face-to-face interview for both the person being interviewed and also the interviewing panel. So I think there will be training and practice that's likely to be required with this continuing. We're also having a lot of discussions around remote working. Questions around this subject is something we get asked a lot by both clients and candidates. Each company in the UK seems to have their own view, and everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing. We can look to other research for a little bit of guidance. A survey we've seen conducted by Gartner covering all UK industries suggested that 74% of CFOs plan to shift some employees to remote working on a permanent basis, and nearly a quarter of those expect to move at least 20% of on-site employees to permanent remote positions. But while government restrictions are in control in the UK over the work from home setup and the need to work from home, it's not yet clear what the overall remote working landscape will look like, both from a planning and a preference point of view. Although not clear, what we are finding is that for both companies and employees alike, face-to-face, in-person contact and the ability for swift collaboration and idea sharing are some of the biggest objections against full-time permanent remote working, not to mention Zoom fatigue. And I get the irony of me saying this to you across Zoom as well. I think what we can say that for everyone, 2020 has been a challenge both personally and professionally, and 2020 has been a year like no other. Although contending with various lockdowns and tier systems, the UK is positive in that the COVID vaccine has been approved, vaccinations have begun, and a way out of the pandemic can be seen. However, on the other hand, attention is also looking firmly at the outcome of Brexit. If the UK's economy is further negatively affected by Brexit as we come out of the pandemic, then companies could be less likely to hire, resulting in fewer job openings and therefore tougher competition for roles. Impact on UK jobs, but to what degree, we will just have to wait and see. What we do know is that it will still be possible for post-Brexit for EU nationals to work in the UK, applying for European temporary leave to remain, which will be approved based on a skills-based immigration system. 2021 is coming up fast, and will it have its own challenges? Regardless of what happens, plans have been and continue to be made. Many companies are pursuing a digital-first approach in their business plan. The use of AI, automation, virtualization will continue to ramp up both everyday use and also business continuity planning. This is already being reflected in recruitment and hiring plans for the coming year. The topics of talent scarcity and skills gap in maritime have not disappeared. They've only temporarily been moved down the list. Once there is further stability, it's very likely they will re-emerge back to the top of organised agendas incredibly soon. So while 2020 continues to be a challenge, it's taught us many things. It's certainly taught us to be prepared for anything and everything. And therefore, the best thing to do going into 2021 is to be prepared, whatever your situation, be it happily employed, looking to start, you're hoping for a new position. Now, I'm aware that I'm coming close to the end of my time. So, if you are looking to find out ways to be prepared, get tips and advice for your job search next year, do get in touch, of course, virtually by email or LinkedIn or pick up the phone. The day of meetings will come again soon. All that's left to say really is that the UK recruitment market and the maritime industry will be going through another interesting period over the next 12 months. And for me, I'm looking forward to being part of it and seeing what it holds in store. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I think listening to you and Jason, it definitely feels like there should be a good time ahead, as long as we make ourselves relevant and keep up with the new developments and adopt to the agile methodology in our own life, right? I have a pretty couple of questions I would like to take. And the first one, I think I will put that to Jason. Jason, with Brexit potentially cutting UK workers off from jobs in Europe, do you think Singapore and Asia in general will try and make a play for our workers with relaxation of any visa requirements?
Sorry, with Brexit implications, will Singapore do what? Sorry.
Yeah, I can repeat it for you, Jason. So with Brexit potentially cutting UK workers off from jobs in Europe, do you think Singapore and Asia in general will try and make a play for our workers? And would there be any relaxation in the visa requirements? So potentially if a person wants to relocate from UK or Europe and come and work in Singapore and Asia.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a, I think there's a, I don't know if it will be triggered. I mean, there could be some triggered by Brexit. And it's an interesting point, particularly across Europe. I mean, it's happening at the moment, and still to this day, there are we are still recruiting and employing expatriates over to Asia and all over Asia at the moment. I guess the challenge at the minute is just the uncertainty and less people wanting to move. But there is movement, but it could allow another opportunity to be able to entice more people over. Yeah. I mean, we'll have to see what happens over time with this, and obviously this is quite a new subject at the moment. Brexit isn't a new subject, but what could happen would be a new subject, and it will be interesting. But if it makes it easier to be able to bring people into Asia, then and more accessible, then I don't see that as a bad thing. I think that could be opportunities for everyone.
Right. And on the visa side, do you think the Singapore or anywhere government?
They're already, I mean, visas for, I mean, the issue, there isn't really too much of an issue with visas too much in Singapore and the wider area. I guess it's particularly for people with experience. That's the area that doesn't have too much of an impact. I don't see the visas being any easier for whether it be graduates, for instance. In some senses, there are obviously schemes as well in Singapore for that. But I think that is going to be, people at a certain level or an entry level. I think that's going to remain to be tighter while the economy is tighter.
Sure. Thanks, Jason.
All right.
I think I would like to take this one for David. and that should be, as most recruitment activity has shifted online, what does Fast Stream prefer? Is that face-to-face or mostly online? Are there any specific things students should keep in mind while giving interviews online to make up for the lack of personal connection? So I think
I think the question there, Maris, was about handling interviews online. Is that correct?
yes. So do you prefer face-to-face or you prefer online? And if you do it online, what are the things you should keep in mind?
I think there's an argument for both ways in terms of interview. I think online, as mentioned, that solves a lot of time in terms of logistical issues and problems. But one of the things that we do notice with online interviews that's different to face-to-face interviews that people prefer is that it's very hard to pick up on body language, tone, and being able to really sort of get a feeling on both sides of the picture. I think looking in terms of preparation for interviews, there's a whole host of advice we could give, but I think it's being able to prepare well in advance for different eventualities that could occur, especially technical hiccups being one of them. And I think also one of the key things that has always come out comes to that interaction thing is when you're actually speaking to a panel of people is not be put off if you find that people in this situation are all looking in different directions, because for example, their cameras can be pointing in different ways. And they may feel that there's a lack of interest, and that's where there is an issue with virtual versus face to face. So that's one of the things I would stress as being one of the things to be prepared for. But there are a lot of things to take into account.
Right. Okay. No, I can imagine. So it is something new. So I would like to take one more question, maybe. Do you think placing people virtually has been as successful as face-to-face recruitment? Both of you can answer as you wish and say in your own experiences. So that's the last question.
I would say, yeah. Thanks, Jay. I would say that just as successful placing people virtually as face-to-face. I think the good marcation of whether someone succeeded is whether they pass their probation period and they work within the company. And we have seen no change with this at all.
Right. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's. I also agree that that it's been pretty successful on that front, and actually some of the processes have been a little bit more sophisticated than what they have done before. So yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, I would then pass it on back to Thomas for the closing.
Perfect. And I would just wrap this up by saying, as a student, getting these insights from all the experts at the panelists on the market, for example, to use this to build further on what we learn at the university is just so great, and it's such a great opportunity, especially saying the HR panel as a final year student who is applying for my first job within the full-time job within the industry. It is quite a relief to hear from the recruitment companies that there's still ongoing process to do this and people are adapting to it. I will end up by thanking all the panelists so much for taking your time at the day to take part in this virtual conference. I would, of course, love to give you all a bottle of wine or something like that. Of course, we can't do that now, unfortunately, but we'll have to wait until we can invite you again down to Plymouth for another event. I also will give a special thank you to Maria and Isabel at the SHIP Professional Network in London, who made this conference happen. And so, yeah, thank you everyone who has participated. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us on LinkedIn or Facebook under the University of Plymouth Shipping Society. And have a very good Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. And just so everyone knows, the recording of the conference is going to be on the SPN London Facebook page for future viewing. So thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.